AC, the year is almost over, which
Hmm.
means that we are going to be discussing technically the 12th and 13th films in the Son of Hammerland series. I think this is the one double feature. No, no, sorry. We
No, we
did a
did
double
too.
feature back in June. So the
Yep.
13th and 14th movies, what's wrong with
Yep.
us? We're on a roll.
We are,
Um,
we are, and I was gonna ask, like, what is your takeaway been from this year? Because it was very different than our Dracula's and Frankenstein marathon.
Different in that they're different kinds of movies for sure, but not different in that I'm going to be twisting on my double negative, so I'm just going to start that over. Um, I have been enthralled equally this year as I was last year. We were talking about what I like to refer to as the name brand Hammer films. You know, your
Mhm.
Draculas and Frankenstein's. There's so much in the canon, and we're not done yet. Well, we got to talk about whatever we're doing next year. I would like to continue doing something with Hammer. I know we had talked about, or I had talked about doing something with Australian exploitation,
Yep.
but for sure we got to do more Hammer stuff. Yeah, it's one of those things where you've got 14 movies that you're talking about, and out of them, I'm looking at our list now. I'm trying to think of one that stands out as being like, nah, that wasn't that great. No, I think they've all been winners. The only exception I think is going to be one that we're talking about today, and that's not even like it's just like I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as some of the others, but
Sure.
I'm also willing to be turned around, convinced as to why it
Mm.
is great enough to be on a double feature with the movie that I thought was far superior. So I'll leave you to guess which one
I was going to
of
say
the
I'm
two.
excited. I mean, I have my thoughts, um, but yes, I concur in that. One of the things that's kind of great about this year is that we've gotten to explore the breadth of subjects, and it wasn't just remakes of Universal classics. We had the forays into the black and white Psycho territory, and we had our stop motion dinosaurs, and like I just feel like Hammer, rightly so, is most fondly remembered for its Draculas and its Frankenstein series, but they really were much more than that. And I mean, they even did things outside of the horror genre, although that is also what they're remembered for. But I liked this journey a lot, being able to kind of show you a few sites around the corners and things like that. And I am eager to talk about the two today because I feel like both of them, they're both vampire films, but they're both vampire films that are really trying to do something different. And this was Latter Day Hammer. So the vein was drying up, as it were, and they were really throwing anything and everything. And as I was watching these, I hadn't watched these two back to back before. I was like, wow, what a grab bag of stuff. They are just throwing anything and everything out there to see if we can keep the audiences engaged. And I was like, wow, I'd forgotten just how wild both of these films are. So,
And
but yes, I'm hoping that you liked them in order of timeliness, because I figured we'd talk about Vampire Circus first.
yes, so I'll just get this out here. Of the two, my
Yes.
least favorite was Vampire Circus,
Okay.
but that's primarily because it reminded me a lot of Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is
Yep.
a movie and a novel that I adore. And it's not fair to Vampire Circus because this came out quite a bit before the film version. I can't remember when the novel was written, but essentially it is uh, a circus comes to town, but it's vampires and the servants of vampires working to enact revenge from
Hmm.
a count who was dispatched by the town folks. It's a very kind of Freddy Krueger type story, or
Yeah.
even. And I keep forgetting the name of the film that we talked about last year for Hammerland. And I feel like I brought this up more than once, and I keep forgetting the title. That's why I rely on you, sir. The
Okay.
one where it's Christopher Lee as Dracula,
Yes.
and he seeks revenge against the people, the men who killed him, essentially by going after the people that they love.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
one was
going
that?
after their children.
Their children,
That's
yes.
Taste the Blood of Dracula.
Okay.
which we'll circle back around to, actually, because I noticed that we have a couple of connections to Taste the Blood of Dracula. But yes, the idea of the sins of the father being visited upon the sons and daughters. And yes, I mean, the prologue to Vampire Circus, I feel like, is kind of worthy of his own little featurette, because there's just that creepy thing, like the doctor. He's not the doctor. He's I forget, his school teacher. The school teacher, played by Lawrence Payne, is just kind of he's sitting out in the field, and he notices that his wife comes along and like lures a young, or just kind of takes a child with her and leads her up to the castle of Count Mitterhaus, and then shuts the door. And it's like, oh dear, oh dear. And you get the sense that maybe the school teacher has not seen his wife, or he knows that, she's become the Count's concubine for a while now, because he's most distressed by this. And everybody in the town seems to know that, she has become his lover. And but yeah, she takes this little kid into the castle, and Count Mitterhaus stands up, all raven-haired glory, and reveals the fangs and just puts the bite on the little kid. I'm like, wow, okay, there's a start. And then it's like, you get the blood, and then here comes the sex, because then she and the Count literally roll around naked together.
The wife and the Count, not the little girl.
No, true enough.
To clarify,
the little girl is just lying there dead on the floor. But yeah, the wife and the Count are just like literally rolling around, like their heads and bodies. And I was like, okay, we're getting it all out there before the credits even roll.
Well, what's amazing is that this is, I think both of these are PG rated movies. Now,
that can't be, really.
Okay,
I believe you. I mean,
Vampire Circus. I've got IMDb pulled up right now. 1972 PG, an hour and 24 minutes. Now, I could understand like a little bit of, look, I'm going to get really crass here, but like side boob, maybe a little flash of something.
Oh, no.
But there is so much nudity in this movie that I'm like, wow, they always say things were different back in the 70s.
Yes,
Boy,
sir.
howdy. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, then, I'm sorry, were you going to jump in?
Well, I was going to say the death of the little girl was very surprising to me, because it's almost like that is the moment when the Van Helsing figure, or whoever is supposed to swoop out of the shadows and save the kid. You don't go around like killing little kids in these movies, but they do. Yeah.
Right in the first, and then I mean, but that's the last straw, and the villagers gather their pitchforks and torches and go and smash the door in and stake the Count, and they drag is it Ella? Is it Emma? What's her name? They drag the wife.
Anna, I think.
Anna. Okay. They drag Anna out, and they flog her, and she runs away. And, and then we flash forward 15 years. And, well, I'm sorry. Before we flash forward, however, as the Count is expiring, he lays a curse upon the village. And then Anna drags him down into the crypt after they set the castle on fire. So his body does not get immolated. It just hangs out in the crypt and with a stake in it. And then she runs away. And then we flash forward 15 years, and the village of Stettel has been beleaguered by the plague. So much so that they have set up roadblocks so that nobody can get in or out of the city, which I'm like, how do they eat? How do they, this is rough.
Well, they don't establish that, but I mean, I imagine there's roadblocks, but they probably have people coming in to, I would imagine, make
deliver
deliveries.
Supplies or something.
Right. I like that this movie, like right off the bat, there's the kid killing. There's also a few other skirting of the rules of the vampire lore, which is something we're going to see a lot of in Captain Kronos too. But there's like vampires running around during the day.
Yep.
There's that really bizarre case of the Count having run through with a stake. He doesn't disintegrate. Like he stays in that coffin for 15 years or whatever it is. And when we cut back to him later in the movie, he's still, perfectly preserved. He's just got this stake sticking out of him. Right. No one ever explains it. So,
well, they do have, they don't explain it, but the only thing I can conclude is that Anna's blood drips onto, and you see those kind of like weird, like kind of like polka dots, the blood landing and kind of being absorbed, I'm guessing, by the body. And I think that may be what keeps him preserved. Again, they don't explain it. That's just a leap on my part.
I don't doubt it. I just don't know. Was she bleeding on him for, I don't know why I made that gesture, but bleeding on him for that whole 15 years? Like, and how did
No,
she?
I don't think, no, she runs away. I mean, she disappears.
Right. Yeah. So I'm like, how did he? That the bleeding on the body, I think, was later on in the film, right? As
They
the
have, it happens
victims.
twice. It happens
Yeah.
twice. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm not saying these are things to pick apart. I'm just saying that
No,
when you go into a vampire film, you have these rules in your head from watching other vampire movie and reading vampire lore, and they're just kind of like, say, no, we're not going to do that, and they don't bother to explain it, which doesn't come across as a plot hole. It's like, no, we're playing by different rules, which
right.
means that anything can happen, and that's really refreshing.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's something we see here, and definitely in Captain Kronos. You know, we learn all about that. There's different kinds of vampires. But yeah, 15 years later, the town's beset by plague, and yet somehow a mysterious circus comes to town, and it is led by a gypsy woman who's played by Adrienne Corey, and Emil, who turns out to be the Count's cousin, I think. He's a blood relation to our Count Mitterhaus. Emil is our Panther guy,
Right. With that amazing hair, and he's also
amazing hair.
Yeah, he's also the face of the poster, or one of the
Yes.
posters for Vampire Circus, which at first I thought it was like a screaming vampirist, but no, it's just it's just a meal.
Well, and the actor Anthony Higgins, he's in Taste the Blood of Dracula. He is one of the sons that takes vengeance upon his father.
Oh, I'll have to go back and look for that again.
He doesn't look the same at all.
Okay.
He doesn't look like a gypsy.
They've got some great, I think, effects here, and they're easy, like what I would call easy special effects, because you've got the Black Panther, not Chadwick Boseman, but an actual Black Panther, who's when he transitions from the Panther to the Emil humanoid form, they'll do a thing where you see the Panther running and it'll jump, and there'll be like a circus cart or something in the frame, and then Emil jumps out the other side. You don't need CGI. You've got the imaginative cuts.
And I mean, the same thing happens. We have a couple of shape-shifting twins who turn into vampire bats, and back and forth. And then we have our dancer, who I think is the tiger, who also she turns. Does she turn it from a tiger into the dancer? I can't remember.
This is
the reason I don't remember is because she's dancing around either in a very sheer bodysuit, or just all together with like stripes painted on her, and it's like, PG, you say? Okay, yes. Fine.
I mean, it's one of the coolest, like, and I'll say erotic, not like exploitative, but it's an erotic dance, and you could see this being something you'd pay to see in the circus. Right. I was confused because it's a traveling show of like circus freaks or whatever, so I couldn't tell if she was supposed to actually be a snake woman, or if she was just a woman with like scales and things painted on her, because her dance partner, he shows up, he's got like paint on his face and on his chest and stuff, so I'm like, it's wearing off, so I hope it's a gimmick. But now I don't know if she was a shapeshifter, and this is one of the problems that I had, and it's all on me. I consider it to be a lack of personality in the traveling circus cast. I couldn't attach myself to any of the other characters in the film. So when they're explaining stuff or whatever, I got totally lost. So at the end, the dancers show up dead underneath one of the circus carts. They're discovered, and they both got vampire wounds in their necks. So I thought, does that mean that they are the human servants, the familiars of the vampires? Is that right?
I think that's right. And also, like, our big strong man, played by David Prowse, soon to be Darth Vader, and formerly the horror of Frankenstein monster.
And A Clockwork Orange, I think the same year.
And also Frankenstein the Monster from Hell. He's the monster in that. So
Yeah.
David Prowse has quite the Hammer history. But anyway, yes, I get the sense that there are human familiars throughout this that are dabbled throughout the circus. I mean, Adrienne Corey, our lead gypsy woman, is not a vampire.
Isn't she
Because
though? What?
no, because she turns out to be, spoiler alert, she turns out to be Anna in disguise.
Right. So doesn't that mean that she had the supernatural ability, perhaps based on vampirism, because they were rolling around in the beginning in the cave before
Right,
they got
right.
overtaken. So I
So it's
thought
like
that
a
was just like,
contact high. I don't think she's actually like a bloodsucker, but I do think, I mean, clearly she has elements of the supernatural about her because she's able to be in the guise of this gypsy woman.
yeah. And that's, it does get a little bit kind of confusing and strange with the lore. I was very proud of myself when the twins show up and they're
Yep.
doing the big somersaults through the air and they change into these winged creatures. I wrote down in my book and I underlined acrobats. Get it? They're acrobats. Yeah.
I like it. Well, and they have kind of a fun, Corsican brothers demise as well, which is like, oh, that was fun. Who saw that coming? Not her.
And this is where it gets a little bit Naked Gun / Austin Powers. There's the bit where the survivor girl, can't remember her name, was it Dora?
Sure, let's call her Dora for now.
Yeah, I think she was the one because she was in the village outside the blockade, and then her boyfriend, whatever, Anton, okay, he and his father,
he's the son of the doctor. Yep.
Son of the doctor. They do this great thing where the father is going to, or Anton is going to, I can't remember who went back to the village, but they do this thing where they're going to go up to the blockade, which is separated, but the village is separated by this giant field. Now you got the blockade on the tree line. They take horses out, they shoot at one, the other guy falls off the horse and kind of sneaks away while the other goes off.
That's Anton, and his dad gets away into the city.
His dad goes, okay, right.
And he's supposed to tell Dora not to come back, but of course, Dora comes back.
It's young love, what are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
But there's a whole lot of business, a whole lot of nonsense. I know I'm breezing past this, but we do have another movie to talk about.
Absolutely right, because there's so much nonsense in this movie. And then amidst all the plot nonsense and the backstory nonsense, there's all the nonsense that happens within the circuits itself. Like we have, circus performances, and we have, circus attractions like the House of Mirrors.
Let's go back to the House of Mirrors in a second. I don't want to forget the climax. I know I'm jumping ahead, but I want to tell people I'm talking about this Austin Powers thing.
Yes.
There's a bit in the climactic scene where it's Anton and Dora versus the twins. And Dora is up in the rafters of this church, which, that's another thing. Like the vampires just kind of hanging out in this church, but they've got a cross allergy. I mean, in a really big way in a second.
Right.
But okay, so the female twin is like on the ground looking up at Dora, kind of like eyeballing her, like, you're stuck up there and eventually you're going to have to come down and that's where we're going to get you. She's watching her walk across these rafters. And all of a sudden, Dora comes up to this gigantic golden cross. I mean, this thing is like the size of a building itself. And she tips it over. Right. And it's like, did the female twin vampire not see this giant cross that Dora was walking towards?
Right.
And B, when Dora knocks the cross over, it falls like it's that bit in Austin Powers where the guy gets run over by the steamroller and it takes like 3 minutes because he's so far away. Like, you had all the time in the world to get out of the way. But the cross impales her, and then eventually her twin brother or whatever, they end up dying like right next to each other, and it's kind of this beautiful little corpse moment.
I mean, and yes, I hadn't even thought about the fact that the twins are in a church. It's a holy place, folks. And yes, there presumably crosses all over the joint. But yes, she does not see it until, oh dear, if Dora hadn't walked over, she would have been like, oh, I thought this was like drugstore. I'm sorry, I didn't recognize that this was like a church. But anyway, yes, there's lots of fun set pieces, but I absolutely agree that, you know, like kind of our townsfolk are a little interchangeable, and it's hard to kind of tie into people. The only reason I recognized our school teachers, because that's Lawrence Payne, and he's the co-star of the 1958 sci-fi classic The Crawling Eye. And so I was like, oh, look, it's Lawrence Payne. 10 years later.
Well, I've not seen The Crawling Eye.
You
So
should.
that's why I don't recognize it. Hey, is it a Hammer film?
It is not, but it is a British sci-fi horror film, which are it's a rarity, as it were, outside of like the Quatermass films.
Okay, so we could do like second cousin twice removed of Hammerland next year.
We could. Well, there is, I mean, we will get to that, because there's like a whole sidebar of like other British horror of the 60s and 70s that wasn't Hammer.
Like Amicus, right?
Amicus, Tygon. There's quite a few of them. I mean, whoever produced The Wicker Man, things like that, where it's like there was some cool British sci-fi, and that's not even taking into account all the Pete Walker films that came out of the 70s. So anyway, sidebar for a later time. But yes, there was a lot of cool British horror that was happening that wasn't Hammer.
Well, speaking of cool things, and you mentioned it a couple minutes ago, is this House of Mirrors that they have.
Yes.
And it's, people go in and it's just like regular funhouse mirror stuff. They have like, I think 3 or 4 of them, of course, the distorted images. But when they get to the 4th mirror, it just looks like it's a large size mirror, but the people only see their reflection. But when they take a closer look, they see something going on behind them, which is essentially their possible future of being horribly eaten by vampires or consumed by flames or any number of things. There's one sequence that reminded me of Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. I don't know if that's where they got the idea for this, but people getting pulled into the mirrors. And even that's a nice trick because it's shown from a side angle. So it's like, we're not even bothering with the reflections, just someone getting pulled through the doorway that we've made to look like the mirror frame.
Yep.
It's really neat stuff. Oh, and when the people get pulled into this mirror during this really cool sequence, they're sort of falling into this dark, windy chasm, and they end up in the crypt of the Count. And it's frustrating because for all the dull character stuff in this movie, there's some really great ideas and little set pieces and things to recommend. It's just, I almost recommend looking. I don't know if the Blu-ray has a chapter search, like a skip to the good stuff feature, but I would recommend watching it that way if you can.
But I think you're right in that this is not necessarily going to be everyone's favorite gateway to Hammer, but it is something you can appreciate. I mean, I think its positioning in December after the second year of Hammer is probably appropriate. Like, okay, if you like Hammer, then you'll be able to appreciate this, even though it's probably not going to be one of your favorites. It's funny you made the comment about Dave Prowse being in Clockwork Orange, because Adrienne Corey is actually also in Clockwork Orange in the scene with Dave Prowse.
Oh no,
she's Patrick McGee's wife. In the house assault scene.
That explains it, because I was watching her in the film, and there's like a little bell ringing, and I didn't go to look her up. I'm like, I don't recognize her, but I feel like I should know who that is. Wow, that's a great connection there.
Yeah. I hadn't put those two together, and then I went, oh wow, that's right. And Anthony Higgins, actually, just one other, he plays a character called Gobbler, or Gobler, in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Do you know who that is?
No. Which one is sorry. Anthony Higgins
he's Anthony, he's Emil.
Oh,
our Panther guy. But I'm kind of like, who is he in Raiders of the Lost Ark? But I'm going to keep a sharper eye out next time I revisit Indiana.
Yeah. Or Indiana Jones, for that matter.
Yeah.
I do. Speaking of Emil, I want to say there are 2 rather spectacular Panther attacks in this movie. I don't think we've mentioned our little person. What I don't
Skip Martin.
Skip Martin, who is sort of the barker. He's the first clue that the
Yeah,
circus has come to town. And he's, pretty cool. I don't know if he's got any powers. I feel like he's another familiar, especially because he's dispatched so easily.
right.
But he's a mean little SOB. At one point, he gets a family out into the woods, the forest, to try and, I guess, escape through like a way around the blockade, but it's just a
Hmm.
trap for the panther to come and horribly devour all of them, which it does. And then later in the film, there is a group of, I guess, was it students traveling abroad or something? I don't know, which doesn't make any sense if there's a quarantine town, but
Right.
they're upstairs in this like boarding house. And Emil goes up the stairs and you don't see anything, but you
Yep.
hear the sounds of the panther bursting into the room. And I've always thought it was like a cliche, blood curdling screams. I got chills listening to the sounds of these people being eaten. Like there's just folks downstairs, like, what the hell is going on up there? And just like,
Yeah.
it's wild.
Yeah. It's not good. However, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the attack in the woods because that's when you have the amazing panther puppet being swung about. And I was like, oh man, I see what you're doing there. And I love it, even though it's kind of ridiculous.
Hey, I was caught up. I don't know what cinema you went to see this in. I watched it in the theater of the mind. I didn't see any
Yes.
puppetry. I saw a lot of quick
So,
edits and some pretty convincing blood splatters.
all right. Well, when you next revisit Vampire Circus, which I know will be soon based on your enthusiasm for it, there's a pretty obvious panther puppet at play.
I was on a live stream last night and the subject of Jaws came up, and someone was saying that they haven't been able to appreciate Jaws since they watched it on Blu-ray and saw like all the, you can like, I guess, really tell that it's a mechanical puppet in a lot of the scenes. I'm like,
Oh,
I don't
okay.
need to know that.
Yeah, shush. Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Dial it back. Just squint a little more.
You
But
or quint a little more.
yeah, oh,
Sorry. Let's move on. Well, do you have any closing thoughts on the Vampire Circus?
not really. It was produced as an outside project. It's got first time director Robert Young directing. He did mostly TV after this. Wilbert Stark, fun fact is that, the producer of this, Wilbert Stark, he was an executive producer on John Carpenter's The Thing.
All
So
right.
he's got some pretty decent genre cred going on there. But yeah, it's again, I think it's a fun diversion, and kind of just indicative of where Hammer was at the time. And then you fast forward. Well, actually, you don't really fast forward because Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, was produced the same year. It just did not get released for 2 years. It
That
sat
was
on
my
a shelf.
that was my confusion because IMDb had it at 1974, but
Yep.
then when I looked at the date in the opening credits, I
Right.
swear it said 1972. So
You are
what's the
correct.
story here?
Yeah, the story is it did not have the faith of the public, and the distributors just basically didn't release it. It befell the same fate that Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires did, where they just like went, we don't quite know what to do with this, so we won't do anything with it. And then 2 years later they went, here, let's just throw this on a double bill.
So are you saying that it was filmed and ready to go, and then
Yeah.
it was shelved, or
Yep.
did it? So no one saw this. It was just the people at Hammer decided we're not going to put this out. We're going to let it sit.
Well, I mean, Hammer didn't really have it was the distributors.
Okay.
So I mean, it didn't have any push behind it.
Which is a shame because I think this is, it's strange because I paused the movie in the middle of it. I did a Google search for Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter anime. And because I feel like I've seen that design of the character with the sword and the kind of the jacket in some like anime or manga drawing somewhere. I didn't
Okay.
dig very deeply, but I did see some like reference images. So I don't know if this caught on like in other places and they were inspired by it, but there is
I
some
believe
kind of a
it.
weird side history to this.
I believe they turned it into a comic book,
Hmm.
and so it did have a. It was envisioned. Brian Clemens, who wrote and directed it, he was the creator of the Avengers TV show,
Hmm.
And so he was looking at it as a potential series to develop, where Kronos would encounter all manner of supernatural killer or supernatural creatures. I mean, he's a vampire hunter, but he could probably take on anybody else as well. It could be supernatural before supernatural.
Yeah, or as would come along a few years later in the 80s, like it's very Incredible Hulk, very
Yeah.
A-Team,
Yep.
traveling from town. I'm just making my way across the country. Oh, my
Yep.
my horse carriage broke down, and there's a lady in trouble. She's having problems with bloodsuckers.
Yep.
And I gotta say, it's a damn crime of cinematic history that this was not turned into a series
Yes.
with our hero Horst Jansen.
Horst
Yeah,
Jansen. Yep.
great name. Looks like a dead ringer for a young Michael Bay, strangely enough.
Okay.
But don't let that dissuade you from watching this fantastic movie. So it's Kronos. He's traveling the countryside, I guess, with his sidekick. Was it
Professor
Gorst?
Hieronymus Grost.
Grost, yes, Grost. I get all the letters mixed up. Who's a hunchback, but it's again breaking conventions left and right. Usually the hunchback is like the the henchman, the lab assistant, like with like Frankenstein or something.
Right.
But this guy is, they're partners in crimes. It's like Holmes and Watson, except they're fighting the forces of darkness.
Right.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen an entire series about this because this guy has such a presence, and I don't know. I would have to watch the movie again to really pinpoint how Clemens goes about doing this, but he establishes that these two characters have a history, not just in, oh, we've been doing this a while, but they feel like such lived-in people that I feel like this was film number 6 in like a series of movies about these characters. I just didn't get to see the other 5.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I really like that there is a strong brotherhood between those two. And you've got kind of the brawn and the brains, and they look out for each other. And, as we kind of alluded to earlier, Grost is the one who reveals that there are hundreds of different kinds of vampires, and the way they attack is different. The way they can be dispatched is different. And like part of his expertise is divining what those methods are. And he has the great thing. He rings an area of the forest with boxes filled with dead toads, because who knew that if a vampire crosses over a dead toad, it brings that toad back to life. And I was like, that's cool. Who knew? And there's all sorts of those kind of fun, like you think vampires, but wait, here's something new for you. And there's some amazing, I mean, there's one scene, we should kind of do a little bit more of a setup, I guess. But we've got the town of Durwood, which is being beset by a different kind of vampire. It's a vampire that does not bite you by the neck. Instead, it gives you a kiss. And in so doing, it sucks the youth out of you, such that our young lasses are being transformed into wizened old hags, and they're left with a little bit of blood on their mouth. And so the doctor, I think he's a doctor.
Dr.
Yes,
Marcus.
Dr. Marcus, who's played by none other than John Carson, who was a star of Plague of the Zombies and, wait for it, Taste the Blood of Dracula. He's one of the fathers that is sinning. But yes, John Carson as Dr. Marcus. Dr. Marcus calls for his old pal Kronos to come and help out, and things go from there. The 3 of them, Grost, well, actually the 4 of them, because they pick up a little gypsy girl along the way, played by Carolyn Monroe.
And, yeah, she's in the middle of the woods, just in the middle of nowhere, in stocks.
Yep, because she was dancing on Sunday.
Right. Now, the only way I think this movie could have been better, because spoiler alert, by the end, everything kind of works out, and Kronos and Grost do that thing where it's like, it's been great. I quote unquote love you, I guess. Maybe we'll meet again someday. And she's like, bye.
Yeah.
I think it would have been interesting if she was, turned out to be a heel, like a vampire. because it's something you could call back to, where they just found this girl in the woods.
Right.
She was in the stocks. She had a story that they bought, but maybe she turns around and betrays him at the end, and there's got to be this big heart-wrenching scene, or maybe she kills Gross and there's a bloodlust or something. But that's just me with my modern sensibilities of always needing more. So it's a perfectly fine story. It's a better than fine story, because my God, I'm jumping ahead around here again, but there's a scene early on where a woman goes into a church, and the church looks, I don't know if this was set designed or if it's a found location that they did up to make it suitable to film in, but it looked like such a real and specific place. It didn't look like a Hammer set, and it didn't look like a real place, but it looked very specific. I'm having trouble describing it, but it was unlike any church I've seen in a movie. She goes in to pray, and there's a giant shadow of a cross falling across the wall, and you're watching it. I mean, it's almost as big as the cross in Vampire Circus, frankly. But the cross, the two horizontal arms of it begin to bend, and that's when you notice it. She starts to notice that, and that's when she's a kind of attacked off screen and discovered later. I'm like, this, again, I've never seen this before. That's a tremendous idea and sacrilegious.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, there's some great fun ideas at play here, and I think that's kind of Kronos's coin of the realm, is that it's all about imagination. Like, what can we get away with? What can we try? Spoiler alert: Dr. Marcus, while he's assisting them, he is beset by a vampire. And for whatever reason, again, changing the rules all the time, rather than him getting the life sucked out of him, he starts to grow younger. So it's almost like the vampire turned him and made him into a vampire who is now sucking the life out of victims. And that allows Grost and Kronos to experiment on him in terms of, how can we kill this particular type of vampire? We now have we have a sample in front of us that we can use as our what do you call it? Your control group.
Two things. One, in my imagination, these guys are the inspiration for how Dr. Van Helsing, played by Peter Cushing, in the later Dracula movies, gets his knowledge. Like, these are the source of the vampire lore and the science, right? Yep. Two, I gotta put it down to good old-fashioned misogyny, although it's ironic because the vampire, our lead vampiress, turns out to be a woman. Yep. Who's doing all these woods stalkings. But you notice all the women victims, they get aged up horribly, and the guy, he gets to age back gracefully. What's up with that?
Well, here's what's up with that, though, is that the women are just victims. And again, we don't know why the vampire decides to turn Dr. Marcus, but it does. It turns him into a vampire of its like. And again, I'm kind of like, well, why did that happen? Because I think Dr. Marcus goes, oh gosh, it was me, wasn't it? Like, he at least claims one victim.
Yeah. Which is, a nice little twist in the story too. I do like it during this test of trying to figure out how to kill him. They do ram a sharpened stake through his chest, and it basically does nothing. It just kind of leaves a cartoonish hole.
All right, fine. But yeah, I really, I mean, our Horst Janssen was a German actor, and his accent was deemed too Teutonic, and so he had to be redubbed by another actor. But yes, I think he cuts a nice figure. Pardon the expression. He, he's very heroic and dashing. He has, blonde hair that he can wave about, and I think he's paired nicely with our kind of our hunchback character, who's kind of got his glasses on. He's very studious, but it's clear that these two care about each other, and we get to see that there's a kind of a odd little bar scene, like it's set in a pub, where these three kind of, rakes who are, swordsmen of some renown, at least. And you watch Kronos do away with them rather handily. And it's kind of a callback to Kurosawa's samurai films where, like the blade strikes faster than the eye, and then, is resheathed. And then you watch the bodies just kind of like slowly, crumple to the ground.
Or in my frame of reference, the bit in Blazing Saddles where Gene Wilder disarms the line of like 25 guys on horseback with his gun.
That's yes.
I
Kurosawa, Mel Brooks, it's pretty much the same thing.
Hey, I am like unpasteurized milk. I am uncultured, or maybe I'm cultured. I have no idea. Bad metaphor. Here's the thing about that bar scene, because there's
Yes.
two of them. There's the
Yes.
setup of the three, as you call them, the rakes in the film, whom uh, Kronos refers to as rat face, fatty, and big mouth. But when they are established, they do this bit kind of like the pick up the gun thing from Shane, right? There's a guy who's not laughing at the lead bad guy's joke, and he takes out his sword and basically brings him to his knees and causes him to run away. Like, oh, so into this vampire story, we're going to have a human villain who's going to be a big problem, kind of like Anthony
Right.
Michael Hall and Edward Scissorhands.
There you go.
But in the next scene is when all three of them bite the dust, and I was sad because that lead actor, I don't know who he
Ian
was.
Hendry.
Ian Hendry. I knew I liked him for some reason.
Well,
But
we'll talk about him in a second.
I thought he was great, and I thought, it's a cool scene. I can't take that away from the film. It's just my personal disappointment that you introduce this great charismatic heel, and then 5 minutes later he's just out of the picture. You better bring someone else to replace him, because I was all in on that dude.
Well, Ian Hendry was this is very much a cameo, because Ian Hendry was pretty well established. He'd been in Roman Polanski's Repulsion. He'd been in Tales from the Crypt. He would later feature prominently in Vincent Price's greatest film, in my opinion, Theater of Blood. But Ian Hendry was also a bit of an alcoholic, and so you couldn't use him for long. So I think they were like, okay, well, if we get Hendry in here for one day, we can maybe keep him sober long enough to finish this scene. And as it turns out, there's a bit of a trivia is that apparently, when Clemens hired him, he said, now you're going to be clean for this one day, right? And Hendry's like, yeah, of course, I'm not going to drink. I won't drink any alcohol. It'll be fine. And come the day of the shoot, he walks into Hendry's dressing room, and Hendry's got a bottle of lager in his hand. And he's like, you promised me. He's like, this isn't alcohol. This is lager. So there you go.
No, knowing that bit of context, I'm wondering if the bit where he falls down on the floor along with his compatriots, was that intentional? I mean, had they even called action on his feet any
longer? Yeah,
right. That was just the B-roll. the one time where they yell "cut" before action. Yeah, so that was There's some great characters there. A really nice, as you kind of in establishing that scene, establishes the rapport, the deep friendship. And also you could tell that, my God, why am I Grost was very hurt and affected by those insults, even though he realizes they were a bunch of scumbags and it doesn't mean anything. He was very sensitive to that. And, Kronos, being as good friends, is sensitive to his sensitivity. And it's just, it's that kind of bond that you don't get in these sort of action horror adventures, these moments of real, I'll call it, humanity between these people.
Yeah, agreed. And then there's kind of a, it's not really a subplot, I guess, but there's a lot of red herrings as to who is the vampire, because we have the children, the Durwood children, Paul and Sarah Durwood, played by Shane Bryant, who would later come on to do Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed and Demons of the Mind. But he and his sister Sarah are the the needle is pointed quite heavily toward them because they're both very kind of, well, Paul especially is very kind of like cool and icy and aristocratic, but there's, Paul and Sarah's mom is upstairs in bed and doesn't get out of bed, and is like kind of ill, and we find out that her husband, their father, was killed by the plague, and that's blamed by the wife blames our Dr. Marcus, for that. And so there's a whole lot of like kind of like, and this is where I go, like things get a little like all over the place, like
a little
like,
vampire circus.
Yeah, a little vampire circus. Because you're like, okay, just kind of like following it along, but you get I think the needle is pointed again quite clearly toward Paul and Sarah as okay, it's going to be one of these two.
Well, I like you mentioned there actually is a blue blood joke, because I think Paul is getting a very casual leeching, and he makes the remark of or no,
No,
was
it's Kronos.
It was
Kronos is getting a
Kronos.
leeching.
Okay, right. Okay, because there was something about the leeches are going to turn blue because he's from very aristocratic stock, which honestly he or Paul could have made that joke. It
Yes.
would have been apropos. But yeah, it's just there are these little bits of really smart humor throughout the movie, not like Joss Whedon hitting you over the head with stuff, but these little gags. You're like, that's a joke about blue bloods, but they don't say, "Hi, get it because of the blue blood." No, none of that nonsense. Let's see. Oh, okay. Here's the thing, and this is when they're figuring out doing the Marcus test.
Yes.
A vampire only bleeds the moment of its death. Had you heard that before?
No, I had not. But then again, we only usually get to see a vampire at the moment of its death. So in terms of like when else might you have blood?
Well, I gotta say, during the many scenes throughout vampire movies where they'll like cut their wrist open and have someone drink from it,
Sure.
because I hadn't thought of that until right now. But yeah, maybe in this universe, vampires don't do that to each other.
Maybe.
Because like there's nothing in here. I'm not dying.
Right. Although I do have to just take a quick sidestep back to Vampire Circus and go, how cool was that final death of Count Mitterhaus by crossbow?
That was pretty amazing. I love the crucifix and then the cross of the crossbow, which I had never even put that together really. That's where my head is at. They both burn like, it almost looked like a trick of the light and not like a special effect of the cross shape burning this bright orange fiery red in both instances. It's beautiful. Yeah.
And then he throws the old crossbow over him, and I'm like, that's awesome. Haven't seen that before. Because when you see a crossbow come into play, you're kind of like, okay, I know how this is going to go. Trust me, folks, it doesn't go how you think it's going to go. Anyway, back to Captain Kronos, where we are fashioning giant, like steel swords and such.
Right, because they figure out that during the Marcus test, as I like to call it, they're doing all of this stuff to him. They try hanging, fire, crucifixion, or the crucifix ends up being what did it, because it accidentally gets poked into Marcus's chest and it kills him instantly. And he falls over and he's all gray and messed up. And like, oh, it wasn't the cross. It wasn't necessarily the crucifix. It was the steel. So this is the kind of vampire that's going to be killed by steel. And so they fashion this nice little sheath, I guess, that goes partway down the hilt of the sword. If I'm getting the parts mixed up, I apologize. Right. That Kronos takes into battle later. Yes.
Well, first they pry a giant steel cross off of a wooden cross in a graveyard. And Grost, who's super handy apparently, because he immediately smiths this amazing sword out of this hunk of steel. But yes, we find out that this vampire also uses mesmerism or hypnotism. And so that's why he fashioned that kind of like mirror right up against the hilt so that he can reflect the vampire's mesmeric gaze.
I did not put that together. it makes a lot of sense because there was a part of me that thought, wait, isn't a sword also made out of steel? Like, what's with the steel on steel action? But
Yeah,
no,
no, it's
the
a reflective
deflecting
mirror.
mechanism.
Yeah,
Wow,
so
that's
that
yeah,
when she's, and you notice it, like she gets kind of like whammied by her own whammy when she's trying to put the whammy on him.
right. And it also works on Paul and Sarah during the big
Correct.
climax where they're sort of like human shields, but they're also like human pillars. They become part of the architecture of the room
Yeah.
because they're standing still and you've got people ducking behind.
Yep. Yep.
It's ridiculous, but again, it's not something that I've seen in a lot of movies. So I'm watching this inventiveness. It's cool because I haven't seen it before. It's wacky, but it's also part of the excitement because, like, wait, does this mean one of them could get their their head chopped off as someone else is ducking behind them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, like this is 50 years ago, and we're seeing things that I still haven't seen another film do or try, which I think is kind of cool.
It is cool, except I feel like this movie needs to be more visible because I feel like more people should, be able to see and appreciate these cool ideas that are going into the story.
Right.
Or like, why hasn't it been ripped off? I mean, I would have no problem saying I already saw that in Captain Kronos. I mean, that's you could do a lot of this stuff in like a John Wick movie or something like that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
but there are some cliches that have been done to death, and there are other cliches waiting to happen that I would like to see exploited and evolved.
Agreed. Agreed. I mean, I love the idea. I mean, we kind of seen, like different, the idea of different vampires, that it's not all vampires playing by the same rules. But I have not seen, like I've never seen the dead toad thing ever again.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a bit of left field lore that just raises all sorts of great questions because
Yeah.
you're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense until you stop to think, well, vampires essentially bring people back to a sort of life,
Mm-hmm.
which my question is, are these vampire toads?
Yes. Yes,
Are
they
they
are.
harmless because they don't have fangs?
And do they have
Or
to
do
stake
they?
them? Do they have to stake them in order to kill them again and put them back in the hole? Who
It's
knows?
a toad kebab. That would be great.
Oh man.
I'd like to see Kronos go around like, wait, we can't leave this town. We've got to finish off the toads. Oh man.
So yeah.
But yeah, I wonder. I mean, that if they were to do a sequel to Kronos and they did the toad thing again, what if they bring the toad out of the box and the toad attacks the person who lifts it out of the box because it's a vampire toad?
Nothing bad could come from this premise. I love it. Only good things could come from this.
Much like a true believer in this movie, you have to have faith, and I appreciate your faith, even if it
I
is in
do.
jest. Let's see. Okay, we do get a reference to the Karsteins or the Karsteins.
Oh yes,
Weren't
yes we
they
do.
were a vampire family from one of the other vampire
Vampire
films that we've talked about?
lovers and twins of evil and lust for vampire, which we skipped over.
So is this a backdoor
Yes.
sequel, spiritual sequel officially? Or is
Well,
it
I
just
think
like Karstein is like an old Bavarian name or something? We're sort of stealing it.
well, I think Karnstein, I mean, it would have been known, especially at that time, it would have been known by the Hammer aficionados. I mean, we had a Karnstein trilogy. So
So is this a chance to well, because this is around the same time as those other films, right?
yep,
In that
yep,
same era. I wonder if this is
yep.
like we're gonna launch a brand new
Well, I mean,
series with Kronos.
it was, yeah, 70 was Vampire Lovers and 71 was Lust for Vampire and Twins of Evil. So this would have been the next year that they were making this. So it would have been fresh in people's minds.
Um, let's see. I'm trying to think. Well, okay, so we have the big reveal, the mother of Paul and Sarah, who has been bedridden and is horribly like decrepit and has this like melting old face.
Yeah.
Turns out that is a sort of a mask. She's actually a younger, not young, but younger than
Mm-hmm.
ancient, rather beautiful woman who is quietly resurrecting her dead husband, who was a vampire, and he comes back, and then there's a big sword fight and everything. I mean, it gets into a bit of business that isn't that exciting, except for the human pillar thing. But I
Mm-hmm.
do love at the end the vampires are defeated. It turns out the kids are not vampires. Am I right?
At all. Yeah. No, vampire, they're completely innocent. it turns out.
Well, and also they have a conversation earlier on in the movie about aging, and they talk about how
Right.
I don't know if this is like a family curse or magic or if they just believe it, but they're talking about like, well, we're never going to get old. I mean, we've got great genes. Maybe they're just looking at, aside from the plague, maybe they're looking at their dad and their mom being like, they never seem to age. We're going to be just fine.
That's what I think it is. I think it's like, like I think it's a bit of red herring, but I also think it's like, that idea of like, we do not grow old.
But at the end, what I thought was great, even though they are kind of villainous, if not the villains of the piece, they're sort of,
Yes.
family patsies. They didn't quite know what their parents were up to. At the end, they're left just kind of like they snap out of this trance and they're left kind of holding each other and freaking out because their parents are both vampires and they're dead.
And they're dead. Yep.
And then but Kronos and Grost and Carla, played by the lovely Carolyn Monroe, they just leave. There's a great bird's eye view from inside this set, and they just walk past these people like completely freaked out and panicking, like, well, our work here is done.
That's right. You get to clean up the mess now.
Yeah, there's no like final thing of like, you killed our parents, and then they have to dispatch them. They're just left to grieve with the remnants of.
Well, and I get the sense that
lives.
they were pretty much in a trance the entire time, so they have no idea what just happened.
That's true as well. So maybe they thought, hey, did they even pick up on the vampire thing? They just saw their
I'm
parents.
sure they have no idea. They're just like, we were here, and then suddenly we went to, we not conked out for a second. We woke up, parents are dead, everybody's leaving.
I do want to
party.
Seriously, I do want to revisit something really quick, and it speaks to Kronos's nobility. And I need you to back me up here.
Okay.
At one point, after Marcus dies, there is or at the moment of his death, there is a villager who's like peeping in through the window of the door and sees this and goes and tells everybody, hey, this Kronos guy and his hunchback friend just murdered our beloved Dr. Marcus. So they set up a mob to go after him. And there's a shot of this great, I think it's in the cemetery on the hill, but Kronos and Grost and Carla are walking, and all of a sudden this mob comes for them. And it's great because Grost is like, Carla, come over here. Just hang out here. This will only take a minute.
Yeah, right.
Our boy's going to do his thing. Kronos takes on this entire crowd of like 10 villagers or whatever. And you think they're all dead, but at the end, at least one of them is kind of like stumbling into frame, like holding his arm or something. Maybe he's been slashed across the stomach. I don't know that he killed any of those people.
Yeah, I don't know either. He may have just done, again, kind of the Kurosawa thing of like wounding, so that you don't, you can't hurt me anymore, but I don't have to kill you. But I don't think we've even mentioned this, is that Kronos, in addition to his trusty rapier, he has a samurai sword. Like he has a flat bladed samurai sword that he uses as his kind of his dagger.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, there's kind of this, well, I'll call an iconic shot of him up on that hill, and he has both of his like arms out, holding his arms, and he's like, bring it on. But what I liked about the way that he handled that scene is it's fine enough to say, okay, he's just going to kill all these, guys are coming after him. But then you realize what it hit me when you see that one guy stumbling and he's still alive. Kronos didn't kill those people because they're not bad guys. Right. They're people who thought that these strangers coming into town had just horribly murdered one of their, the beloved town doctor. So they were rightly going to exact revenge. Right. He doesn't have to kill them. He's got to take care of them because they're going to get in the way of him saving the world from vampires.
Right.
But he still does the noble thing in that situation.
Yeah, he understands that they're scared, and he has to just kind of stop them from hurting him, but he can stop short of killing them.
Van Helsing, the Hugh Jackman movie, I could not stand that film. My question now is, why didn't they just make Van Helsing as Kronos, Captain Kronos, vampire hunter?
Some might say they did,
and I would say that they failed if they
that was supposed to
well. No, yes. But yeah, this thing needs to be. It could be a Netflix series. I would totally a period set Captain Kronos. Get Ryan Gosling. No, I'm sorry.
Well, Kronos means time, And what Clement's idea was that he was going to drop Kronos into various periods of time, like a Time Lord. And you wouldn't have to explain it. He would just show up and fight whoever needed fighting and then ride off into the sunset.
You know what would be interesting about that idea is if they did it, but he could be sort of timeless and ageless, but you never quite get an origin story from. So you could have an instance of someone who looks like Horst Johnson, maybe he's in his 30s, but in another episode, there's like a teenage Kronos who shows up in a different time period. And then maybe you have another one, he's like 70 years old and still kicking ass. Like each episode, you get a new time period and a new age at which he's combating evil.
All right, start pitching this to Netflix right now, because who doesn't want to see that?
I'll be first in line, or first on the TV. Anyway, final thoughts on, I guess, both of these movies, and we should do, like, I guess, a wrap up looking ahead to 2023. This is a hell of a way to end the year, I think.
I mean, again, and that was kind of my hope, was that, because this is where Hammer was in the late 70s. They were trying to stay alive and vibrant in a world where, things like The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw were right around the corner. And again, I think, for the loyal folks who are discovering these movies later, I think in the moment, in the late 70s or the early 70s, I think perhaps there just wasn't an audience for them anymore. They were looking for new thrills. But in kind of going back and revisiting them, you can appreciate the style and the heart behind that studio. And I think there's a reason why we're still coming back to these movies 50, 60, 70 years later.
Definitely. And I'm a bit bummed because, we are at the end of Son of Hammerland. It's been a great journey, but I don't know what lay ahead. We'll have to talk about some ideas, we've talked about a little bit earlier on this episode. Yeah. But can we do more Hammerland? Should we do some Amicus films or some other studios?
So
I don't know.
There's definitely, I was thinking about this because we could definitely probably find another 12 interesting Hammer films for next year. I don't know that we're going to get 12 good Hammer films for next year. But there's definitely some interesting ones, and for those who are completists, I think there's a lot to find. But I think like a kind of a British horror of the 70s, 60s, and 70s, I think that could be a fun series that isn't classic Hammerland, but definitely adjacent.
What if we mix it up and have a few Hammer entries with some companion pieces of other studios? Because they need some love, I think.
Yeah, again, I think there's a lot of possibilities. The funny thing is that, like, these other films would not exist were it not for Hammer. People were looking for something like Hammer, but not Hammer. And that's how things like Blood on Satan's Claw or The Wicker Man, or, even, again, Pete Walker, those are all kind of like reactions to what Hammer had wrought.
Would it be offensive if we did that and called it Stepson of Hammerland?
Well, not if we include Hammer. If we include official Hammer entries, then I don't think we could do that.
Okay. Well, we'll talk.
To be discussed.
Yes,
for sure.
We'll make plans. AC, thank you very much. Not only for this episode, but for the last 2 years, and even going beyond, for when we were doing non-Hammer related podcasts. It's been so much fun. I wish you an early happy new year, and I can't wait to come back and talk about whatever we're going to discuss in January 2023. Can you believe it?
I know. Thank you, Ian, for being such a glorious co-pilot. It's so fun kind of like revisiting these films and seeing them through your eyes for the first time. I think that's kind of the joy of being a horror fan, is that you get to introduce other people to the things that you love, and sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't, but it always provides a new perspective, because you can't ever watch the same film twice.
Well, my one wish for 2023 is that we encounter, and you can tell me without spoiling it, maybe you can just make some suggestions and sprinkle one in there. I want to watch a stinker. I want to watch an awful movie.
Okay.
And just because it's almost unfair. Like we've had 2 years of pretty top-notch films to discuss. So we
Yep.
gotta get a little nasty.
Yeah, I think we can. I think I can oblige you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Happy Hammer New Year. I got to work on my outro, but yeah, man, thanks. I'll catch you later.
All right, catch you later. Bye.
Bye.